Nissman, and I am speaking to you from my music studio here in beautiful Greenbrier County, West Virginia. And I thought it was time to do a program about one of the great composers. You know, we speak of the three B's and we say Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. Well, it's time for a program with the music of Johannes Brahms. Now, normally, I might be playing one of Brahms' piano concertos. Actually, the second piano concerto in B-flat is really my favorite. I call it the Mount Everest of all the piano concertos because it really is a symphony for piano and orchestra. But unfortunately, we don't have an orchestra available at the moment. Maybe one day you'll be able to hear me in concert play this magnificent concerto. But I thought I could go back to some of his solo music and explore and rediscover and put together a wonderful program for you. And I thought it would be fun to start with a very early piece. You know, Brahms was a piano prodigy. In fact, I laughed when I read a quote from his first piano teacher who said, oh, he was spending too much time composing and not enough time practicing. But that was wonderful for us. And at the age of 19, he did a tour with a violinist, a Hungarian violinist, and they paid a visit to the outstanding violinist of his day, Joachim. And he was the man to whom Brahms' violin concerto is dedicated. And he was very impressed with the young Brahms. And he said, oh, you must go to Weimar and you must visit Franz Liszt. Now, by that time, Franz Liszt had stopped his performing career. He was settled in Weimar, giving master classes to his piano students. And Brahms appeared with a young violinist and handed Liszt his most recent composition. It was the Scherzo, Opus 4. And remember, he was 19 years old, and he was a bit intimidated by Liszt because Liszt said, would you like to sit down and play it? And he refused, so Liszt sat down at the piano and sight read this composition. And it might remind some of you of Chopin's B-flat minor scherzo, because this is the way Chopin's scherzo starts. It's quite similar at the beginning, you'll hear that. And then there's a theme that Brahms uses that sounds to me like the theme from Grieg's piano concerto in A minor. But you know, composers always stole from each other or were inspired by each other. But this is a wonderful piece to hear because you can see what the young, talented Brahms was writing. It's a scherzo with two trios, so you'll hear the beginning, a trio, then you'll go back to the beginning, and then the second trio. But I'd like to play it for you. bad for a 19-year-old, is it? Actually, it's a fun piece. And let me tell you a story of what happened at that meeting. So Liszt graciously played the composition and was very impressed with Brahms. And then he said to Brahms, he says, you know, I've just written a sonata and I'd love to play it for you. And he started the piece, and I have to say, the sonata is a long work. It's around 30 minutes long. And he looked over to Brahms in the middle of, while he was playing, and there was Brahms sound asleep. That did not bode well for their friendship, which was rather complicated down the road. But anyway, after Brahms visited Liszt, he then went to pay homage to the composer Robert Schumann and his very famous wife, the pianist Clara Schumann. And he must have played this composition for them. Maybe he played a few others as well, but they were overwhelmed with his talent. And the next day, Robert published in his journal an article which made Brahms famous overnight, which was the good news and the bad news, because Brahms, being the sensitive soul he was, he always said that article really did him in a bit, because he felt that he couldn't live up to all the words that Schumann had said about him. And you know what happened? Brahms also went back to a lot of his early compositions and destroyed them because he didn't think they were good enough. And it's too bad, because we might have had more of Brahms than we now have. But the friendship was very special. Unfortunately, the following year, Robert Schumann entered the insane asylum. He had made a suicide attempt. And this was a very difficult period for Clara, because she was forbidden to see Robert. And Brahms, being the good friend that he was to both of them, he served as the intermediary. So he went to visit Schumann in the hospital until his death, and then became a very close and intimate friend of Clara's. I mean, after Robert's death, he helped her even raise her 7 children, and really Clara became his muse as well. And which brings me to the next 2 compositions, which I am sure Clara performed wherever she did concerts, because she was a real champion of Brahms music. And you'll see the difference in the way he wrote for the piano, because the scherzo, I just thought it was fun to play for you what he played for Liszt, what he brought to Liszt. And his pianistic style really matured in these 2 rhapsodies. And you'll also hear, well, of course, he had a wonderful knowledge of the keyboard. I always think with his compositions, only a pianist could have written him, and he was a wonderful pianist. But you'll see there's a lot of emphasis in the lower regions of the piano. Brahms has these thick textures, and I think that makes the performer's job a little hard, because we have to bring out all these voices. But I read that his father was a double bass player, so I'm sure that that influenced those sounds he heard from childhood he brought to the piano. But let me play for you the first Rhapsody in B minor. Remember, this was written probably 28 years after that scherzo you just heard, so there's quite a difference. wonderful piece, isn't it? And you feel that agitato, that underlying tension, that intensity, and I'm sure Clara Schumann must have played this brilliantly. If only we could have heard her play it. And let me play for you the next Rhapsody, because the second one in G minor is the more famous, and it's as wonderful a piece. And you will hear what I'm talking about with where Brahms really uses a lot of the bass register. And of course, our job is to make it clear, but you can see he's very partial to the bottom of the piano with these thick textures. There's those memories of childhood, of his father practicing probably. And listen at the very end, because Brahms writes out a ritardando. Now, a ritardando is when the pianist is supposed to slow down, but we don't have to do anything, because what Brahms does is he lengthens the notes for us, and if we just follow the music, the ritardando is there, but it's very effective. So here is the G minor Rhapsody. isn't it? And you heard that written out retardando at the end. That's a definite Brahms trick. Then there was a period where Brahms really wasn't writing for the piano. Most of his larger works were written when he was younger. That's when he wrote his 3 piano sonatas. And actually, he was spending time writing for symphony orchestra. That's when he started writing his 4 symphonies and 200 songs he wrote, choral masterpieces, the German Requiem. And he did come back to the piano later in life. And what's interesting is when you look at his later compositions, it's as if it's another composer, because he wrote these smaller pieces, and I always call them windows to the soul. It's as if he's letting you feel his innermost thoughts and feelings. And also you feel his melancholy, you sure feel his depression. He did suffer from depression. And they're very, very special pieces. You know, I recall something that my old piano professor said to me when I was a 20-year-old student learning the Brahms Second Piano Concerto, and he said, "You won't be able to play Brahms until you're at least 40 years old." And I looked at him kind of skeptically because I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. But now I understand this. At least you can begin to play Brahms when you're 40 years old. And because Brahms takes a lot of life experiences to understand. He's a complex composer. So I've chosen 3 of these shorter pieces for you. So let me play one of them from Opus 117. Yes, 117. And I think you'll understand what I'm talking about in terms of he's allowing us to take a peek inside. So. You see what I mean? They're just gems. And I'd like to play for you two more from his Opus 118 set. And this set he dedicated to his beloved Clara. You know, they never married, but their friendship continued, and it was a very deep and close friendship. She inspired him, and he inspired her. So, a mutual, wonderful friendship, actually. And this first piece is written molto appassionato, but even under the passion, you hear the struggling of the soul. Another gem, right? I told you this is a lifetime challenge to play Brahms. And the last piece of the set is based on the Dies Irae theme. So there's no, how do you say, no ambivalence that he's depressed and thinking about death. It's marked dolente, mourning. So, but in the middle section, he does give us hope. You know, it's a glorious middle section, and you will hear that. And then he comes back to this Dies Irae ending. But this is truly a masterpiece. I mean, I sometimes think Brahms is really an underrated composer for the piano. So take a listen to this one. That's definitely Brahms' soul speaking. or, or we try to get closer, right? We try to get closer to his spirit. Well, at the end of Brahms' life, towards the end of his life, he moved to Vienna. He left Clara in Germany. What's interesting is he died shortly after Clara did. But in Vienna, he made the friendship of Johann Strauss. In fact, he always said it's a pity he never wrote the Blue Danube Waltz because that was his favorite. And I thought, I can't leave you with the Dies Irae as our closing piece. I have to play for you something a little more uplifting, one of Brahms' waltzes, except this waltz is a bit melancholic, but it's really lovely, and let me share it with you. Touch of Vienna. And another bit of trivia, in 1889, Thomas Edison contacted Brahms. He was experimenting with the first recording, and an assistant of his came over to Vienna and recorded Brahms talking and playing the piano. Unfortunately, the playing of the piano didn't come out very well, but we do have an example of Brahms talking, and I thought that was a nice bit of trivia to have. And recordings have come a long way, of course, since 1889. But I think we need to listen to more Brahms. You know, he wrote absolute music. His music never had a storyline. It's all about feelings. And we hear, especially when you listen to his symphonies, which I recommend during these times, they're good medicine. You really hear the nobility of his soul. You know, he was criticized for being too much in the shadow of Beethoven, but yet other people finally realized that he carried the mantle of Beethoven forward, and you hear that in all of his symphonies. And he left us with such wonderful, powerful music. It's music that truly does transport us to another world, a magical place, which we need nowadays. So I hope you've enjoyed my visit with Johannes. I had fun going back and exploring his music and realizing that I will spend a lifetime with this music. But in the meantime, please stay well and stay safe, and I look forward to our next visit, and we'll have more fun. Thank you so much.